To our work session. Today's date is April 18th. It is a Tuesday. Members present in the boardroom, we have members Wilson, Lessons, Jacobs, Holloman, Higgins, and Bellamy. Do we have member Donnelly online yet? He will be joining online, so we will announce, we will correct the record when he joins us. All right, so I'd like to call our meeting to order. We've already done the roll call. Item B is request for information. We have none outstanding unless board members have new ones they'd like to submit at this time. Seeing none, we're going to move on to our discussion item. Before I hand it over to Dr. Bryant, I do want to remind the board, you did receive emails, but our reorganization meeting will be April 27th at 5. And then the swearing in of our continuing board members will be on May 9th at that meeting. Okay, all right. 27. All right, we are now on item C. Dr. Bryant.
Thank you, Madam President. Good afternoon, ASD board and community. We'll have 3 presentations today on our agenda. The first one will be to answer any lingering questions about the administration's proposal to implement professional learning communities district-wide. That will be followed by an initial FY25 budget look ahead, and then we have a few slides regarding ASD healthcare. I'll hand it off to the team once they're seated.
All right, well, good afternoon. So we have a short presentation for you. With this presentation, we're hoping to answer some of the questions you had for us at the last school board meeting, and then we can go into some, answer any other questions that you guys might have. To begin with, I'm gonna have my crew here go ahead and start through the slides, and then at the end we will be able to give you kind of what our recommendation is and moving forward. So
thank you. Good afternoon. This presentation is in part to answer some of the questions that came out of our previous presentation. Before we jump into those details, we wanted to take just a moment to review some of the high level aspects of what PLCs are. So they're professional learning communities. They're opportunities for educators to collaborate on professional practice and for student improvement. They examine outcomes using data for students. Professionals will come together, study problems of practice, and work through those together, often utilizing professional literature, courses, and other professional development. It's an opportunity to make practice public, to take the learnings that are occurring in PLCs and apply them to the classroom, and also to educate the peers within the building. It also gives teachers an opportunity to focus on those areas of instruction that they feel they need to grow in order to improve student achievement, and those individual topics and small group focus for that PLC gives them an opportunity to improve collectively through that collective efficacy. Next slide, please. So some of the benefits of PLCs, it is that regular ongoing opportunity to collaborate. PLCs occur weekly. There are those, the cycles allow the professionals and teachers to focus on different topics throughout the year. It supports accountability in all parts of curriculum instruction and assessment. It ensures that teachers are focusing on the board guardrails and goals. And finally, it provides teachers an opportunity to improve in their craft, which increases morale, provides the district an opportunity to recruit high quality educators and keep them longer in the buildings. So finally, with board goals and guardrails in mind, as we move forward towards a district-wide PLC, next slide, please. It will give our teachers an opportunity to focus more on K-3 reading adoption and the state reading initiatives, improvements in rigor within the mathematics as we bring on new curricula and focus on our board goals. It gives teachers an opportunity to explore improved practice with multi-tiered systems of support and using data to improve instruction. As we look at improving social emotional learning through PBIS and some of our other initiatives and projects, it gives teachers opportunities to grow in that field. It also, as we move forward with 6th grade coming into middle schools in the next 2 years, as we continue to improve rigor for all students through our inclusive practices work and provide more opportunities for students in college, career, and life readiness, PLCs provide a foundation for that work.
So good afternoon, everyone. Just a quick overview of the historical context of the work that's been done with PLCs up to date for the Anchorage School District. From 2006 to 2017, there was various individual efforts at the high school and alternative school levels. One elementary school as well that implemented PLC models on their own and had their own individual models going at various points in time through that timeline. As the interest in PLCs in the district grew over the summer of 2018, there was a calendar committee formed, and part of their mission was to look at PLCs for the district as a way to increase student achievement and develop that collective teacher efficacy that we've talked about as a part of PLCs. And there was a survey done that said that 63% of respondents were open to the idea of PLCs in our district as a part of the new calendar. So that initiated what we call the Plaque Committee during that fall, which was led by Jenny Knutson, and she gathered an ASD team of principals, teachers, union leaders, and district leadership to really dive deep into PLCs, what the model would look like as a success for ASD, with the idea of moving ahead to full implementation preschool through 12th grade. Part of that learning was attending a conference so that they could dive deep into understanding. They looked at schedules. They looked at all aspects of the PLC. It was during that time on the Plaque Committee that both Monday and Wednesday late start were determined by that committee as the ideal times for a PLC. Unfortunately, much of that work was halted as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so things were stalled in terms of a district-wide implementation at that time. Despite this, at the high school level, there was a significant interest in all high schools moving to a uniform system because at least half of the high schools at that point had implemented an individual system. So the 2021 school year was spent really developing that common system and researching with our high school principals. And it was also during this time that Monday mornings were selected as the ideal late start time for PLCs during that work with that committee. So if you go to the next slide, from 21 to 23, this current school year, all high schools have been implementing PLCs as a late start Monday model. And the PLC is about 45 minutes long. And at the end of the 21-22 school year, there was a survey done with both faculty at the high schools and our principal ranks to determine if that was still the model to continue with the following year and do kind of a 1 year after action review of the implementation of PLCs. The data came back overwhelmingly saying that we'd like to stay with that late start Monday model. And so that has continued this year. Also this year, Eric Vissi here next to me and his team have been leading a committee around PLC implementation that was similar to the high school principal process with elementary level staff and principals. Union leadership has been a part of that as well as district leadership, and they have attended the Learning Forward conference this year. They've really looked at schedules. They've looked at best practices, calendars for implementation, and then they recently just took a vote that Monday mornings and a late start schedule would be their preference as well during that committee work. So that leads us to this spring, where we are considering it district-wide and presenting to you for consideration. So I just wanted to expand that timeline a little bit more from our last presentation to give a few more details. And then if you go to the next slide, I just wanted to highlight we've involved in various levels from the Plaque Committee to the high school planning to now the elementary division planning around PLCs, lots of different stakeholders. And I know that that was a question in our last presentation. So you can see by the list here in front of you that we've really tried hard to involve lots of different levels of communication with our staff and our stakeholders throughout all the processes that have taken place. So I just wanted to highlight those on this slide for you. And the planning has really been collaborative with all of these groups as well. It hasn't been dictated ahead of time, a final solution. It's really been a group effort to come to where we're at with the recommendation today.
So as we get into more of the rationale, so more information might be needed to help explain like why Mondays, why not a different day of the week? And so Mondays, for our perspective, it has the least amount of teacher absences, as well as it allows, the essence of a PLC is it's that applied learning. So you're taking contextually relevant information, instruction, curriculum, and applying it into your practice. And so starting at the beginning of the week and diving into that at the beginning allows for teachers leveraging their own planning time and other time to be able to embed that and inform their practices throughout the week. So it really aligns with the mission of what a PLC is supposed to be doing. Also, if Tuesdays and Thursdays were selected at the high school level because of the block scheduling, that would significantly impact block scheduling at the high schools if it was a different day. Fridays can be difficult because of so many staff absences. We have a significant amount of staff that, due to whatever reasons, Fridays tend to be a day that people are out more often than other days. Fridays also have sports activities, other things, as well as grading days, that would lessen the opportunity for staff to be able to take advantage of the PLC model. So in looking at the days of the week, Monday really is the better day from our vantage point for implementing a PLC structure at district-wide. Next slide. As far as like the late start, some questions might be, why not an early release versus a late start? So within the late start model, one of the perspectives of the teams that have been looking at this over the years was the lack of impact from a student programming and student supports and student activities. We'd be able to provide a consistent schedule for practices and games by having continuing the late start both at the high school level, but also bringing it down to the elementary level. We do have more supervision for the early drop-off for students in the morning. One of the things at the elementary level, looking at, could we use our paraprofessionals and help provide some supports for parents and that have some challenges as we adapt to that, especially in the first quarter. We know our friends over in the Matsu did this, and they helped use their staff to be able to help that, to bridge that for families too. Student dismissal practices at the afternoon are generally longer, which would take away that PLC time. So instead of a 60-minute, you'd get a lot less time than that because of the dismissal practices and how that happens at the elementary level. So in order to provide and secure the time for teachers to engage in the work, the late start would be preferred than the early dismissal. Also, a lot of the supports that happen after schools, the supports wouldn't be able to happen and the activities wouldn't be happening because the staff will be in the PLCs. So you'll have that gap there for students by doing a early dismissal versus a late start. And then the last piece is the shortage of after school programs is a consideration for why we would want to have a late start on a Monday morning. Next slide. So this is a schedule of what it looks like right now for our bell time and what a late start would look like. So that first row there, staff PLC time at the high school would continue with the 7:15 to 8:15. The middle school and elementary schools would add for those two times. Buses would run an hour later. So the student attendance time at the middle school would be 9:15 beginning, and at the elementary level would begin at 10 a.m. under our current bell schedule that we have. Next slide. For the potential for our school start time changes, if we change that around and we move that to the model where elementary school starts at 8 a.m. and so on with high school and middle school, this would be the staff PLC time under that model. The student attendance time on Monday mornings would begin at elementary. Students would be there at 9 a.m. on Mondays, high school 9:45, middle school 10:30. And again, the buses would run an hour late there. Okay. And scheduling considerations. We know we have our new wellness policy, so we want to make sure in our master scheduling, the elementary students have a minimum of 20 minutes of time to eat. That isn't necessarily lunchtime, so more of that seat eat time would be minimum 20 minutes. Secondary is a minimum of 30 minutes. Recess, we'd have to have the cumulative of 30 minutes, obviously. And then middle school and high school, the adjusted class periods would take place on Mondays. In addition to with preschool currently has a collaboration on Fridays. We've moved that Fridays to align with the Mondays, which is that way we'd have a consistent practice across all of our programs in all of our schools. So we do some calibration there as well.
So there were budget questions during our last presentation as well. So we wanted to provide some more explicit budget information. Some of the PLC practices are already budgeted into the secondary budget. So this is a breakdown of additional funds minus what is budgeted already. So the first budget item is what we are calling PLC site-based specialists. So those are folks that are basically the folks that run each individual PLC. So if you have a group of 5 to 10 teachers who are participating in the PLC, there would be one teacher who's responsible for orchestrating and facilitating that PLC for their colleagues. And they would earn an addenda to do that extra laid work and be that instructional leader. So that amount of $199,000 $2,000 there is for that cost for both elementary, middle, and secondary or high school teachers. We also have budgeted an addenda for what we are calling PLC leads. Those are the folks that orchestrate PLCs for the entire building in collaboration with the principal, so that they can really assist each individual PLC to make sure that everything's on track and working towards that collective goal at the building level with the principal. The next budget item is what's budgeted already as a part of secondary PLCs. That's a budget amount that's already been allocated for the next fiscal year. So if you take the difference of what's been budgeted and what individual addenda items we're looking for, there's a subtotal of about $204,000. We do have to add benefits for that, so you'll see that additional amount there. And then the total fund request, taking away what's already budgeted, is $235,000. And $720. So, and that would be all to provide compensation to teachers for that extra work and really keep the work on track and focused so that we have really good outcomes for our PLCs district-wide.
So the PLCs that we're asking you all to approve would be for Monday mornings. With a late start on Monday mornings. We've looked at all of the different options since the last school board meeting as well. We just have kind of dived into, okay, what are the other possibilities? What could we do after school to be able to support all of our kids and to support all of our kids district-wide, especially at the elementary level? If we had an early release, we consider that to be pretty much impossible. So we would be asking if we can't do Monday mornings as the time, we'd probably just ask you to table that and we would just keep the high school doing what they're doing now and move forward with what we're doing now. So that's where we're asking to start that next year as timely as we have a lot of stuff we need to be working on with our K-3 ELA adoption, as well as our 6th grade to middle schools. We have a lot of stuff we're doing with CCL work as well as we plan out all of those academy things. So that would be our ask, and that's what's in the memo. And we'd be welcome to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from board members? Who wants to go first? I know you have some. Member Wilson.
So just what I heard, I just want to make sure I was correct. All of the high schools have late start on Monday now, currently?
Yes.
Okay. And so they have the opportunity to work together. The staff has the opportunity to work together, and that's within their school or district wide?
What we have what's happened over the pandemic that's been pretty cool is we are able to have PLCs district wide for those things such as art, choir, psychologists, some special ed aspects. So they actually Zoom with each other if it's approved through the principals of the buildings. So not only do we have the PLCs happening in the building specific, but they're actually also across the schools as well.
Okay, let's go to Member Higgins. Member Higgins.
Just a question, just curious about the busing, because you're going to have people working a different shift on Monday versus Tuesday through Friday. Do you anticipate any problems with that? You've got a contract, you got union contract, you got the business, contract with it. Is that something you don't see that being an issue or a stumbling block?
As far as the busing contract, Mr. Anderson, do you have any concerns about that going an hour later? I guess that's something we just assumed would be available because they'll still get the same number of hours that they would have now.
Well, the half-hour difference would make it a little different run later on Mondays, right? Would it run a little different?
You could start the route earlier or later, as long as the bus drivers get the same number of hours per day, and it's the same with Reliant. They get paid based off the number of routes they run, not the time it starts.
Okay. The only other comment I'll make, I like the list up there of people involved. I think the issue I heard with Matsu was too much top driven down without that involvement, and it wasn't as successful as it should have been. And I like the approach you're taking, so thank you.
Thank you. Member Jacobs.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. So I think I touched on this the last time this came up, and the 10:30 I think is going to potentially cause some nervousness with parents. And I think it was touched on a bit earlier, some of the mitigation measures that we can utilize. Could we talk more about what the day will look like? Will students have an opportunity to be on campus for any reason prior to 10:30 at middle school during the PLC day? And then I think we talked about that would impact not everyone being able to participate in the PLC time if there was some sort of, I don't know if it's a 0 hour technically if it's happening at 9 o'clock, but yeah, so anything about that would be helpful.
I can speak to that at the middle school level, and I think we're going to see those same concerns at elementary, where we'll have students arriving later than parents would normally expect that to happen. And administration understands that we may have to provide a transitional period for that, so that families can be provided some sort of support for students or supervision as we bring the district-wide PLC into our process. The hope is that as families become accustomed to the difference in the schedule, that they're able to provide supports for their student before the school day, because transportation won't be able to get students there until that hour later start time.
Follow up.
Yep, so two other quick questions, which may be tangentially related but not directly related. The first, how are PLC topics, curriculum that are addressed during PLC time chosen now? Is there collaboration with staff, or is that something that's decided by administration and then select and then notice given? And then the looking forward to Proposition 14, now that has passed, I'm wondering if, thinking ahead a bit, if we can seek if we do offer something before 10:30, if that's something that we could potentially receive funding for to mitigate the cost of the PLC time, or something that occurs before the PLC time, or during the PLC time, or if that would fall under unallowable contributions that would put us over the local limit. Thank you.
So I could speak to how PLC topics are decided. When we implemented PLCs across the board with high schools, we started our first PLC actually just with staff learning what a PLC was, and the protocols to follow so that it was an effective use of time. So what you saw was an initial kind of structure where it was very much teaching kind of the mode of operations for PLCs, and then it's expanded into more teacher-based topics as time goes on. And so it's a tight system to start with, so you can set the stage, and then it becomes more collaborative over time. This year, in the second year of implementation, teachers and principals work collaboratively to identify the topics in the building, and there's lots and lots of staff input. And we've even moved, as Sven indicated, to cross-school collaborations for PLCs. So if you're a fine arts teacher and you're the only one in the building that teaches orchestra, you can collaborate through PLCs with another orchestra teacher and learn from them at a different building. And so it starts with kind of a tight system so that we can get the protocols in place so we know people are using time appropriately. And then we expand it to having a lot more teacher influence. And it really is teacher driven when you get underway.
And that's also why we have those positions at each building as the leads, to be able to help guide each of those different topics.
Okay, next I have member lessons.
Madam President.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I did have a question on funding, and if there's a local contribution limit hitch and us getting some of the money back from the addenda or supporting something else before 10:30 at the middle school level.
I think, Member Jacobs, we may need to take some time to review the fine print of Prop 14 as it relates to the specifics before we answer that. I would be interested in getting some insights by this Friday to help inform the decision. I think the other piece would be the actual partnerships themselves. There are some complications when the late start arrangement is just once a week. So there would be implications with the providers, and a lot of logistics we'd have to sort out if this passes, but we're certainly open to it. And of course, the local contribution limit will be at the forefront of our mind too.
Thank you.
Madam President, do you mind if I add one more thing?
Sure.
I was just going to mention to Member Jacobs that 0 hours are also an option for us to look at, and that may be where one of your questions around Prop 14. But 0 hours are something that, as Mr. Zwani indicated, would be a nice transitional kind of support opportunity where we could offer something before school starts officially, even on that Monday, if we need to look at that as an option.
Because I'd also add into that 0 hour thing is with being able to do, if you have a 0 hour, usually that means that the teacher gets off an hour earlier and can have their PLC time after, and that could be some Zoom opportunities, because usually it's all most of the high schools have the same types of teachers, like music or of the sort.
Okay. Now member lessons. And I'd like to just for the record, Member Donnelly has joined us online.
So thanks for preparing all of this. I appreciate kind of the statement that an early release in the afternoons would be pretty much impossible. So I appreciate the intentional focus on it's either this way or don't do it at all. I think that that helps narrow the options. I think at like a high level, I am totally aligned with the idea of PLCs as supporting the student learning, because it will support the ongoing culture of adult continuous improvement, right? And that's, I think, from what I'm understanding, is a highly effective use of adult time, and it speaks directly to the community's goals. I mean, the questions that I get sometimes are very pointed in community councils or other meetings, what are you going to do about student outcomes? Well, this is something that we would be doing in support of improved student outcomes. And coming out of a pandemic, we know that our students need additional highly effective supports to accelerate their learning. And to me, this seems like it is worth the effort. It also, as I was reviewing the recent Picus-Auden study that we shared with our with all legislators, they're brought up in that study as a highly effective thing to do. In fact, they suggest doing them 3 times a week, especially if higher BSA to the tune of $13,612 that the Picus-Auden study suggested we would need to see that kind of growth. If we were to receive that, that would be a really good use of that money. But I don't think that we're going to get a $13,000 BSA increase this year. So I do think that an hour a week is a very strong step in the right direction. So that's really not a question. It is a long comment. I do want to echo my interest in supporting families in those awkward mornings. So if it's a 0 hour and that's the path forward, then I think that would be a really wise decision to make. 10:30 for middle school is going to be a hard pill to swallow for a lot of families. So whatever we can do to outline a path forward to support our families, I think would be valuable. But I do think the PLCs are a strong step. I mean, they add, I guess maybe one question I have is, what's the total amount of time for professional development? Like, what are the hours that our teachers would normally have? And what does adding 30-something hours of PLC time a year do to that? Because we're not doubling it, but
I would say that we have about 2 real days or 3 real days of in-service time for PD. So this would over double it.
So that's a lot of additional professional time. And it's not just in single one-time doses, but it's an ongoing cyclical process of improvement.
Yeah, that was going to be my comment. Member Lessons is that there's extreme value in having a weekly kind of reminder of what your goal is. One and done kind of trainings are great for individual topics, but they don't kind of make you stick with a topic over time. And the beauty of PLCs is that you can drill down into individual students and how you support them as well. So you can look at their data, how they're doing, and really look at interventions and all sorts of things so that there's that continuous improvement that you mentioned. So,
And I'll just add, at elementary, we have no structure like this in place, right? And so we do wonderful trainings, the sit and get kind of one-day trainings that we can roll out and do an exemplary job of doing. But the challenge in elementary school is time for teachers to work together and collaborate and build practice and that collective efficacy. This for elementary school will let us do that.
Okay, thank you. Member Donnelly, welcome. You have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to thank the staff for their analysis of the instructional hour count. It was very helpful for me in understanding what the impact of this would be on the instructional hours our kiddos are getting. I still remain concerned that we need to be getting them more instructional hours rather than fewer. I'm very hopeful that this is a positive step. But I do remain concerned about the overall discrepancy in our shortfall of instructional hours in Alaska and our district versus other states. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Donnelly. Did anybody want to comment, or can I go on to my questions? Oh, Member Holloman.
And this really is a follow-up to Member Lessons, but one of the things I think a lot of people don't realize outside of education is how isolated educators can be. And it may have changed a little bit, but to some degree, they're in their rooms by themselves with students all day long. It's really not that easy to know what your colleagues are doing, and to some degree, even where you are relative to your colleagues, and unless you somehow purposely plan a meeting outside of school hours to sit and talk about it. The middle school model kind of demands it if it's enforced and managed correctly. And I do hope a lot of
planning is done with principals as to what the outcome should be, how they monitor that everybody is actively participating and doing what they should be, so that we do get the results out of this that we should. But I do think one of the huge bonuses will just be everybody being able to kind of peg themselves against each other and, of course, share the good ideas, but also just kind of realize what's happening in other rooms and what's working and what's not working. So, given the complexity of what teachers do, this is a minimal amount of time to consult with colleagues. I think in the private sector, it happens a lot more often just as a natural fabric of things. But in public education, you can go a long time without ever really talking to anybody about where you're at and how you do what you do. So I think it's an excellent step forward.
Thank you. So I have a couple of more comments and questions. As you continue to develop the PLCs, how is it going to be monitored? I don't expect an answer today, but and I do have a little bit of a concern that we're not including support staff in the PLCs, because I think that is a very important piece of what happens in the classroom. So trying to figure out how, as we get the more information on the impact of Proposition 14, as we continue to design, the PLCs, just make sure that there are pieces for our support staff, because it can't just be, for me, it can't just be about teachers. I mean, as a principal, I'd give half of my little pinky finger to have a PLC. I never had a PLC. We had to borrow from middle school, helped a whole lot. Other than that, we were keeping people late, bring them in early. Then you had to do it 3 times because, you do it in the morning, you do it at lunch, do the same thing in the eat. But this is so much better. And then my other question is that the time is dedicated and there's no opt-out. People cannot opt out of the PLCs. So for me, that becomes a monitoring issue. And as a board member, I'd like to have some at least quarterly reports, if not biannual reports or something on how they're doing.
So just to give you a little deal, with high school at the end of each quarter, there is a session with the whole staff at your school to actually share everything you've done in the PLCs. Mm-hmm. Also, we have a clearinghouse for all of our PLCs that have been done across the schools. So if I'm at Bartlett High School, I can go look at the clearinghouse and see, okay, they've studied this certain topic and this is the results they had and this is what they did. So we actually have a clearinghouse for what we are doing in each of those different PLCs. So quarterly, they share out with their staff. If they're in a district-wide one, quite frankly, I don't know exactly how they've done that because I moved over here a little too soon before we had that part.
I can speak to that. So if they're doing a district-wide PLC, often what we typically see are specialist positions like music or some sort of fine arts specialty position. And so what they're doing is sharing that out at their department chair meetings and with their coordinators. So that's how they're sharing their data for accountability. So to Member Bellamy, to your point, or President Bellamy, excuse me, that accountability piece was really important to me as the Senior Director of Secondary when we implemented both collaboration time at the middle school level, but also PLC time at the high school level, because one of the biggest criticisms that we get when we implement things like this that are not student facing, like direct contact with kids, is that there's a public perception that it's a waste of time. And I stressed over and over again, and others that worked for me stressed over and over again, that we have to utilize this time very wisely, and there were accountability measures put in place from the get-go. So I would anticipate we would continue those and build those at the elementary level as well.
And my final question has to do with itinerant teachers who travel between schools. Will they participate based on their schedule for Monday?
typically that's what we've done, is if they're at a particular school Monday morning, that's who they participate with PLCs for. We also have some part-time positions, and if they are there Monday mornings, then they participate as well during that time. It's a little bit squishy for afternoon scheduled folks, and that's something we'll have to problem solve.
Okay.
And then at the elementary level, if I could back up a little bit to echo the comments you made about the support staff being a part of that. At the elementary level, we typically have a kindergarten paraprofessional and then resource paraprofessionals. That's really the extent of our support staff that are instructionally based. You do have some self-contained classrooms in many schools that have paraprofessionals, but I would echo the importance of having them as part of that team. Like our structured learning classrooms that have some of our students with the greatest needs, having those people participate in that. But moving back to the question about, the last question that we were talking about.
I don't know, was it monitoring or opt in, opt out?
Yeah, and so the principals would be a part of that process and monitoring and making sure the accountability structures are in there and being able to report on that, as well as through the leads and through the professional development that we're going to roll out in introducing this at the elementary level.
Okay.
The leads actually meet regularly with other leads across the district, so they're in charge of kind of helping that accountability piece at the building level.
Okay, and so professional development for principals then would continue under the leadership?
Yeah, we actually have provided quite a bit of PD around PLCs at the high school level, both for principals, but also for the leads and the site-based specialists that lead the PLCs. We have regular meetings where they receive PD. We've pulled them out actually for some professional development in the summer, like in the summer months, just prior to school starting. So we've supported all that through different professional development opportunities.
Okay, and this is my final question. So principals are expected to do, with the support that you're giving principals, with the manager, what do you call them? Those the EBE,
the site-based specialists.
Site-based specialists. What is the expectation for principals? They are to be, what is their role with and how they utilize those resources?
Folks. So they attend the PD with their leads, and so they really are a team together. The lead and the principal lead the PLC effort in the building. The lead's responsibility is really to do some of like the logistical kind of work, so we can take that off of the principal's plate and they can focus on just having the bigger picture. And the leads work specifically with Stephanie Alexander, who is in our teaching and learning department, who part of her role in that department is to help coordinate PLCs for the secondary division. So they're still leading the whole effort with support from their PLC lead.
Okay, great. Thank you guys very, very much. And with that, I'm going to transition us, Dr. Bryant, to the next topic, budget. Thank you guys. Good job. Welcome, Mr. Ratcliffe. You've had a busy day. There you go.
There we go. All right. Thank you. It has been a busy day. This afternoon, I want to go over a tentative FY25 outlook. Understand that these are pretty rough projections. There's a lot of unknowns out there that will come and materialize in the next several months. But just want to give you kind of a high level overview of what we're looking at, what that deficit might be, what some of those Senate bills and House bills that are out there, how they could affect us. So for our first slide, just a highlight of the budget calendar that we go through. Right now, it's about the middle of April where the legislature is wrapping up their first 90 days and going into their next 30. They're really getting into the weeds on their budget now, so it's a really good time for us to do our advocacy. Next slide. So the structural deficit that remains, and I really wanted to show you how this maths out. So when you're talking to people, you really kind of understand when we're talking about a deficit, how that deficit is actually calculated. So just walking through this sheet real quick, the ASD FY24 budget, which is our general fund and our the $20 million we're expected to spend for ESER, is a little over $618 million. Of that $618 million, about $65 million is funded by one-time money. And then we had a PTR increase of about $7.4 million. So the way that these add up are a little bit odd when you look at this, but we'll get there and explaining it. I see Pat kind of giving me that doesn't make sense right now. Look, so, but really, you know, the PTR increase was the big structural change that we made in our budget. So we are going to present this as if we had added that back. You know, if we get a big influx of money, I think that's one of the priorities is having teachers in the classroom, which as well it should be. So we wanted to add that back into this calculation so you really see how that will affect our budget. So the total structural deficit would be our use of one-time money, how we supported our budget, plus really that big structural change that we made within the PTR. So about a $72 million structural deficit exists in the FY24 budget as it sits today. As far as how that would increase, the 3% inflation would be calculated on that $618 million plus that $7.4 million for the teachers added back to it. So 3% times the sum of those two would get about $18.8 million of inflation. And that's one of the big unknowns going into what the FY25 inflation is going to be. You know, we're 85% people, so this really is going to tie back to what contracts are settled at. We'll get into that a little bit later, some of those other outlying factors of why this is eventually going to not be correct. This is our best guesses of now, but eventually, you know, this is our projections don't ever exactly match what actually happens. So our FY25 funding needed, that $644.7 million would be the $618 million plus the $18.78 million plus the PTR increase. So $644 million would get us back to where we are at about FY23 standards with our PTR and funding. Based on current revenue models with the state statute, the 5960 BSA, if that carries over to FY24, that's about $554 million of actual revenue we would receive. And we would have exhausted all of our fund balance that's available down to the board minimum, plus the rest of our ESER money. So that will leave about a $91 million structural deficit, which again includes adding back that PTR dollars, the $7.4 million for the PTR. Well, that's a question.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just trying to I'm sorry, I'm jumping in. I do have a question. So, I mean, when I subtract when I start with our revenue and subtract the FY funding needed, I guess I don't see where we've added back the PTR.
The PTR is added back into that FY25 funded needed column. So within that 644 million is that 7.4.
Okay.
So it's the total of those three, the FY24 budget, the 618 plus the 7.4 plus the 18.8.
Okay. Did that answer it? I think so. Okay.
It's not the cleanest way to show, but it's how it kind of went about it in my head.
I'll never be able to explain it like you do, but it makes sense. It makes sense. Keep going.
All right, so there was a couple different competing scenarios out there within our fundings from the legislature. The first being Senate Bill 52, which has a BSA increase of $1,000 for FY24 and another $348 for FY25, and then it's inflation proofed in FY26. So under these assumptions, we don't assume any new FY24-25 local tax revenue. For FY24, those tax rates are set, so no matter what happens in this legislative session, it'd be really hard for us to go back and be able to collect additional local tax revenue. However, we may be able to in FY25. It's not included in this model, but that's going to be subject to the local tax cap. So we're at the either the lesser of the local tax cap or the state tax cap. So when the state tax cap goes up because of a new BSA increase, we're not going to be able to immediately match it with local funds because of that local tax limit. So for FY24, that would be about break even on a surplus or deficit. About 73 million is pretty close to what would add back that one PTR and be able to put our money back in savings. In FY25, that other 348 would generate an additional $98 million above what we're currently have, or about $7 million, almost $8 million as a surplus. Again, that 3% inflation number, that could be 4%, which adds another 6 or 7 million to it. So that those percentages on inflation do have a really a large impact on how much that deficit's going to be. So this is I really like Senate Bill 52. I like the fact that it would be inflation proof. That would be ideal for us to be able to create ongoing fiscal and instructional plans that don't involve continued reductions. The House one-time proposal that was out there now are. Is there any questions on this before we move on?
Questions? Go on, Member Lessons, and then we'll go to Member Higgins.
So just to make, I'm on, the slide. So that would, with the House one-time proposal, the chart that you have here shows us restoring PTR to FY23 levels in FY24. Thus
yes.
carrying over 42 million to FY25.
No, I guess in FY24, we wouldn't have the PTR restored until in 25, it'd be calculated in there if we save that a whole 49.
Okay, so this shows no change in the FY24 PTRs.
That would be correct, yeah.
But
I can remodel that to include that too. I think that's a good point. That I believe that probably should have been included in that.
Though, if I could add, there would be a number of programmatic implications to restoring the PTR. One of the things we have to think about is that the positions that we close were not filled. So we'd essentially be restoring a number of vacancies. And by the time that this would happen, the teachers in question would have already been transferred, and it would create a domino effects of things that are not insurmountable, but programmatically are legitimate challenges we need to think about.
Follow up? Are those programmatic changes and challenges, this is maybe a question for the superintendent, already happening then? I mean, we are moving down the path. We have approved a budget for FY24 that is increasing the PTR, so people are already being reallocated.
Correct. So when the board passed the budget on its time frame, we moved full steam ahead. So that way teachers had the opportunity to select the school that was the best fit for them, and other considerations, including staffing and scheduling. All of that work is happening now, and it would essentially need to be undone, in a month's worth time during the summer. So there are challenges, but I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but it would be something operationally would be very critical to think about.
Okay. All right, Member Higgins, let's go to you.
There was one thing that jumped out at me. I'll go ahead and mention. You put an inflation rate of 3%. I realized that 80% of our costs personnel, we've got limitations on what we adjust them, and that's the reason why a lot of our costs is so far down below inflation, because we're not keeping up from a salary standpoint. And so my only concern is showing a surplus here without taking into account what the real inflationary factors are that we aren't adding into our operations is kind of a little bit misleading. I realize the problem you have, you don't want to overstate it when we got contracts that give 2% increase or something else, and we got inflation of 8%. But somewhere I just don't want to send the word that this is keeping up inflation wise, this thing, because to me, it's substantially less than that.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely correct on that. The biggest thing that we're going to see in FY25, though, is we have our three largest bargaining groups will be unsettled at that time. We'll start bargaining with them next year. I believe that's our AEA, Totem, and ACE bargaining groups. They are set to expire at the end of FY24, so we don't really know what those inflationary increases on those three biggest contracts are going to be. So, but you're absolutely right. I mean, like, this is frankly kind of a guess to what that inflation rate is going to be. And I think that's kind of where we get into in any other projection we're doing this far ahead of time, is there's so many unknowns out there just being able to kind of quantify those and say what they are is, so when they do change, you're expecting it.
Okay, thank you. Member Jacobs.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. This isn't touched on here on the right side of this slide, but the one-time funding for us to receive that, it is allocated behind, it would require a vote of, I think it's 2/3 to 3/4 of the legislature to access the CBR. So the one-time funding isn't given at this point. I think it's actually the vote to tap into the CBR failed. And so there is a scenario where neither of these things happen. Am I wrong?
Oh, absolutely correct. And as we saw a day or two ago where the House voted to approve their budget, and then they couldn't pass the 3/4 vote to draw the education funding that was included in the CBR out. So currently that budget does not have any sort of education funding in. Senate's still working on their budget, and we'll see where they land and then reconcile it. So, but yeah, there's countless number of scenarios between these two that could happen. I think these are probably neither one of them may be likely at this point, but certainly hoping for SB 52.
Okay. Follow up, Member Jacobs.
Yeah, I just wanted a comment. Thank you for the answer. I just wanted to stress how little certainty there is with either of these two options, but that gets into that neither of them may happen, which I think underscores the need for fiscal certainty going forward and further validates the need for something like Senate Bill 52. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Yes, Member Lessons.
So this chart that you prepared shows us the FY25 outlook. The FY24 budget has a little bit looking ahead to FY26 and FY27, and the administration's very rough estimates keep getting bigger. Do you have a sense of whether SB 52 would give the district a path forward to make plans? Could we balance FY26 and FY27 budgets with the provisions of SB 52? Does it get us there?
I believe SB 52 would get us there. You can see at FY25, we would run a surplus. However, we do have other projects, the PLCs, other curriculum adoptions. There's other things that we want to do with that money too. So it really kind of depends on what the board prioritizes. And also, again, back to those contracts being 85% of our costs, what those settle at. So there's a couple of big factors in there that could really change that number. But if we can get the BSA corrected and inflation proofed, that goes a long way to be able to creating some long-term sustainable fiscal plans.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much. Did you have, I have a couple more slides.
Yep. So I want to just go through quickly some of the challenges and with these estimates, the caveats and limitations, of course, that some of this stuff is going to change. We haven't closed out FY23 yet, so I don't know exactly how much money we're going to end up with this year, what our enrollment will be next year, what legislative changes will be made. There's a lot of changes or things that we're doing now that we may not be doing in the future. There's curriculum adoptions. We've talked about CCL initiatives, the professional learning communities, all these things we've just talked about today that could change future budgets. So just keep that in mind. Our enrollment, those estimates are assumed to be static. Enrollment may change. We have it scheduled to go up or projected to go up a little bit next year. However, after that, we've had overall in the last 10 years, 15 years, net migration out. So just kind of cognizant of the enrollment's not going to be the same as it is today, whether it's up or down. But it does assume a static enrollment on these models. And then whatever those inflationary cost drivers, the unsettled contracts, the medical cost inflation that's been running well above regular inflation, and then the labor markets just having the ability to hire the individuals that we need to perform these functions. So there's a lot of challenges that go into making these estimates and making them this far ahead of time before the budget's actually being considered. We had that challenge too when we talked about the FY24 budget, because we started that in July. So as we came closer into December and figured out what our pro forma was, and then our final budget, those numbers continued to evolve as we got more information. So just to be aware that this is in the same kind of realm as that, where we need to kind of take with a grain of salt that these are our best estimates at the moment, no, they will change.
Okay, keep going.
And I think we had one more slide that had from the December 10th work session of all the things that we've discussed all throughout the first semester of the year with regards to budget. Every 2 weeks, we were putting a new item up there. And then we kind of quantified it within this last slide of the work session. We took the PTR at 1 and then some administration and operation cuts and added a little bit of special education services. So, and then all that fund balance to help balance the budget. So really that was just to kind of rehash what we had already looked at and give the public an eye, here's the things that would come up again in future conversations.
Andy, do you think we need to change our calendar, our budget planning calendar? The first slide that you showed. I mean, it seems like we're starting earlier. Or so like, I mean, you can't do much until the end of the fiscal year, right? Well, till we know what the legislature is going to do.
Right. I mean, I think once the legislature wraps up, we'll have a lot better idea what we're going to have to brace for the following year. So I suspect we'll start more conversations in July or August again, giving you estimates, although, I don't know if we'll go down the same very detailed analysis of all these different programs that we did last year. Frankly, it's the same board and not a lot of structural changes that we made. So the information will be largely the same.
Okay. Member Jacobs?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. So I'm going to touch on the topic of fund balance because it came up in Senate Finance today.
Boy, did it come up.
My understanding, a handout was passed out maybe to legislators, but to others as well in the briefing room that indicated ASD has $92 million worth of funds sitting in the account that I'm hopeful is true, but I don't think is true. So could you give us an update as to where we're at with our fund balance and why Deed's reporting on their website might be a bit delayed? Thank you.
Is this in respect to the COVID relief funding line?
I believe that's the case. It references total COVID relief funds remaining as of 4/15/23, and it lists us as having 92 million.
Yeah. Okay. And that's based on what they've reimbursed us to date, not necessarily what our actual costs are. So the way those grants work is we're allocated a certain amount. We have to spend the money and then go get request that money from the state. Another reason why we need other fund balances because we need to have that cash flow to be able to front that money and receive it back from the state at a later time. But that does sound accurate to me, but I would caution that with, we still have, that was only through December, the end of December for our reimbursements. So it doesn't have anything for the third or fourth quarters. And most of our costs, since they're in that Easter money was dedicated toward teaching staff, the majority of our costs are going to be incurred in that fourth quarter because we run on a 12-pay system where we make payments to our teachers from September through June. And then we have 2 additional payments in May. It's kind of like a savings to help get the teachers through the summer. So by and large, we'll have a couple extra payrolls in that fourth quarter submission. And that's where most of that money is going to be spent out. And again, we're projecting around $20 million or so to be unspent by the end of the year.
Go on.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. So a quick follow-up. There was also conversation about using non-COVID one-time funds related fund balance to resolve deficits and the lack of an increase to the BSA. One of the complications, I believe I understand, to reducing fund balance down too far is potential impacts to taxpayers and relates to interest rates on bonds. Could you elaborate on that perhaps?
Sure, and I believe that's an Anchorage specific. It wouldn't be a statewide issue, but we do hold a bond reserve of about almost $26 million for the bond rating agencies to assess our credit worthiness and help get a lower interest rate on our bonds. That is still going to be maintained for next year, even with our current plan of using $45 million of our fund balance. It makes up the bond debt reserve makes up about 4%. And then we should be about at 8%, all things being equal. That's where we projected down to with $45 million in fund balance.
Follow up?
Yeah, well, a different question, and so if someone else has a question, I'd be glad to.
I'm not seeing any hands. Continue.
Okay, thank you. So one of the scenarios not covered previously on the slide is House Bill 65 as amended out of House Education, which cut the BSA figure to 600, 680 maybe. And I'm wondering what that does for us and where that lands us next year in comparison to a middle ground, assumedly between Senate Bill 52 and the one-time funding from the state.
So if I understand your question, there was a different, or the initial BSA increase in HB 65?
Right.
And how much was that? Do you remember?
Great question.
I don't have it in front of
680. Yep. I appreciate you bringing your calculator today.
We still have one more topic, so we might need to go on. We'll try to get it answered, but
the $680, I think that's where they generated the one-time payment of about 174 million statewide. That would get us about the 49 million.
Okay, that's what I'm looking from. Got it. And so that would leave us even if we use those funds. I'm sorry, Madam President. Last follow-up.
Yes.
Even if we use those funds, that would leave us with a deficit of 42 million. Is that how I'm reading the chart?
Yes. Well, if we use those funds for next year, we wouldn't have that money available to push forward. So that would increase that deficit back up to like 91 million. If it's in the BSA though, and we can count on it, then we can go ahead and budget for it. So if we got the equivalent of the 49 million one-time funding for FY24, we could spend it and then have it again to spend the next year if it's included in the BSA. The problem with the one-time is you just don't know the following year what you're going to get, so you can't really count on it.
And Madam President, last follow-up, if I might. Okay. So we had a really great exercise where we sat along with community members and we, Mr. Higgins, just a second. Okay. We grappled with kind of these puzzle pieces that on your second to last slide, I guess right before the questions, absent the passage of Senate Bill 52 or something like it, which completely addresses our funding challenges. Do you see the pieces of the puzzle that this board has to work with being fundamentally different a year from now, absent the passage of a bill that budgets long-term fiscal certainty for ASD?
No, I believe all these things would be right back on the table along with other, the school closures and whatever else that we have out there. There's a lot of things we discussed, and I think every one of them would be back on the table in the event you have a $91 million deficit. There's not a lot of way around it.
Thank you.
Okay, you good? Any other questions? Member Lessons?
I guess I'm just I'm looking at the savings on that chart for closing Abbott Loop, and with a $91 million deficit, there's a lot of schools. I mean, you could close like every one of our schools. Maybe not. Maybe it's a little hyperbolic.
No, that's a little high. That's a little much. But we could probably.
I guess my point is the magnitude of the deficit.
Yeah.
I guess that's all I want to say.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Were we going to add a slide for HB 65 or you good?
No, thank you, Madam President. I think I understand, and with the reminder from Mr. Ratliff that the one-time funds, I think it might be helpful to add a slide addressing HB 65 because it does contain the second year of funding and some certainty. And I also am really wishing to avoid the conflation of one-time funding with the BSA increase, which is something the House has started doing, which isn't accurate. One-time funds are not a BSA increase because the BSA is statute, and one-time budget funds are an appropriations bill. So I think we would be wise to separate those two.
Yeah, and we can certainly come up with another scenario that looks at that the same way.
All right. Thank you very much. Good job, Andy. Thank you. Appreciate your help earlier today, too. Okay, so that brings us to our final topic for today. Just a brief overview of our health. and we'll let you introduce our guest.
You bet. Good evening, Madam President, members of the board. Marty Lang, Chief Human Resources Officer, and I'm here with Ty Walty, who is the Senior Director of our Benefits Department. And we wanted to provide just a brief update on the status of our ASD health plan. First slide, Mike. Before we jump into an update on that, we wanted to just highlight the fact that we actually provide healthcare coverage to our employees in all bargaining groups through 4 different employee health plans. We contribute to the the Alaska Teamster Employer Welfare Trust on behalf of our bus drivers and attendants. We contribute to the Local 71 Health Plan Trust for our custodians and BPOs. We contribute to the Public Education Health Trust, the PEHT, on behalf of our teachers and other members of the Anchorage Education Association. And then we cover 6 different groups, 5 bargaining groups, and our exempt employees through the ASD health plan. And you can see there the number of eligible employees associated with each of those plans. And because it comes up as a question often when we're talking about health plans, we also included those who elect not to have coverage through those plans. Next slide. As you know, health plan funding is primarily done through contributions from us as a district, the employer, and often the employee, depending on which plan they've chose. Those employer contributions, the ones made by the district, are negotiated through collective bargaining agreements. And you can see over on the right there what those current amounts are for FY23. For our bus drivers and attendants, it's a little bit different mechanism. We actually contribute a set amount per hour based on the number of hours they work and their longevity in the district. But for all of our other groups, we contribute a flat amount per month for the employer contribution. Currently, that's $16.40 for Local 71. We did just settle a contract with them, so that will increase $25 a year each year for the next 3 years of that contract. For the PEHT, on behalf of the teachers, that we currently contribute $1,750. And for the ASD health plan, the monthly contribution is $1,695. I'm going to turn over to Ty now. She's going to talk a little bit about the structure of our ASD health plan and how we manage that and some of the vendor support that we have. So, Ty.
Thank you, Harvey. Testing. Yes. Great. So I just wanted to share a little bit more insight on how our ASD health plan is managed. We do work in conjunction with several vendors to manage our health plan. And just for some historical information, the health plan was moved to a self-funded health plan in 2010. And so at that point in time, the district made that decision to go to fully self-funded, meaning we pay all claims and all associated costs with our health plan. We do work with Alliant Insurance Services, which is our broker who assists us with managing our health plan. And that relationship with Alliant has been established since 2011. In addition to the broker services that Alliant provides, they do also provide additional support during our open enrollment period, including customized communications and mailings of those communications to our employees. That comes at no additional cost to the district. In addition to those communications, Alliant does also provide presentations and services to the benefits department to help with open enrollment. Aetna is our third-party administrator, and they do administer the medical piece of our health insurance, as well as the pharmacy benefits, dental plan, and assists us with open enrollment. So we are pulling additional resources from our vendors to help support that open enrollment period. Triad is a newer vendor that we have established a relationship with. In November of 2021. The district launched a new benefits platform to make it easier for employees to not only manage their benefits, but also for the district to provide communication out on the benefits that are available to those employees. Triad provides Benefit Spot, which is the portal for our employees to access their benefits, make any changes, as well as facilitate their open enrollment. Triad also provides a support for our flexible spending accounts, our health savings accounts, and tracks our health reimbursement arrangement enrollments. Additionally, in 2017, the district brought in Vera Whole Health Clinic that was opened, and that is to provide a reduction in claims costs and efficiencies in care management. So this is a near-site clinic that is available to our ASD employees at little to no cost, depending on the health plan that they are enrolled in, and they can visit this clinic to receive care for preventive care, acute care visits. They can do lab draws, pick up prescription medications that can be dispensed directly from the clinic. In addition to that, we do also work very closely with our union representatives with a task force. The task force comprises of 2 elected representatives from each union group who provides additional advisory input on our health plan. And they're essentially our eyes and ears on the ground to be able to provide us feedback with what is happening with their members, if there is any positive feedback or negative feedback or things that are a concern with our health plan that we need to address. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it back to Marty.
All right. As you're probably aware, we spend about $100 million a year on healthcare for our employees as a benefit. About a third of that goes to support the ASD health plan. The slide that you see now is a 5-year financial look back on kind of the health financially of the plan, as well as kind of a current position of where we are this year with claims information through the end of March. So I'll just kind of walk through the different rows here so you understand what's in the table. In the first row, by year, you have the total operating revenue for the plan. So that's the total amount of revenue through employer-employee contributions. The next line includes the total operating expenses for each year of the last 5 years. That would include our fixed costs as well as those claims that come in on behalf of the plan that we pay out as a self-funded plan. The third line represents the operating gain or loss for that year. In the middle of the table, you'll see there's interest earnings there. We do get some interest on the investments where this money is being held. So that's represented there as revenue. And then second from the bottom, you'll see the change in net position row, which basically gives you the overall picture for that individual year, whether or not we ran a surplus or a deficit for that particular fund year. The last row is the one of kind of particular interest for me. It shows essentially our reserve fund for the ASD health plan. So if you look at the end of 2018, the net position at the end of the year, we had just over $1.2 million in reserve. In 2019, the plan that year actually ran a surplus of about $2.3 million. And so the reserve was up to $3.6 million at the end of 2019. You can see 2019 and 2020, we ran a surplus. And then coming out of the pandemic, as we spoke to last time, we addressed the board on this topic. Our health plan started running hot, as did most health plans. We saw a lot of claims coming in post-pandemic, and we started pretty quickly to spend down the money in that reserve fund. We ended last year with a reserve of just over $1 million, but our position this year eroded that pretty quickly. Right now, we have claims in excess of $4.8 million that exceed the revenue that's gone into the fund. And so right now we currently have a deficit of $3.7 million. The good news is in December and January, we saw some really high numbers. And in February, our claims started to drop. In the month of February, we saw actually only 76% of the expected claims for that month. So our revenue for February actually exceeded our claims to the tune of about $750,000 coming back off of that deficit. So hopefully we'll have some more months with experiences like that between now and the end of the year. So because of our current status, we will require a general fund transfer at some point at the end of the year to zero out that balance since we have spent through the remaining reserve. Next slide. So looking ahead a little bit, the forecast for next year for FY24 is an increase of about 16% for our renewal cost. That is if we didn't make any changes to our current plan as it exists. We had some internal conversations and decided to take steps to try to limit that increase to something closer to 10%. Part of that was done through an ongoing conversation with the task force. We looked at the structure of our plan and we started having conversations with Alliant, our broker, as to what changes we could make in our plan to make it more cost effective. Of course, there's always a balancing act there. We don't want to strip everything out of the plan to make it so austere that it's not really a benefit to our employees, but at the same time manage it in a way that it remains affordable for the district. And so through that ongoing conversation with the task force, we did decide to increase employee contributions by 5% for next year. To put that in real dollars, employees will see somewhere between a $3 and a $17 increase per month next year for their healthcare plan, depending on which plan they have elected. We did elect to increase the deductible and out-of-pocket maximum by $500 for an individual and decrease the out-of-network reimbursement from 60% to 50%. Part of that makes the plan more affordable and also hopefully will drive people's behavior a little bit in terms of directing them towards in-network options where we have better negotiated rates for our claims. Next slide. We also took some additional steps looking into next year to try to reduce the cost of our plan on an ongoing basis. We are going to do a dependent verification in November of next year. Anytime somebody comes and wants to add a dependent to their plan, whether that's during open enrollment or through a major life event, we do require them to verify that that person is eligible. But once they're on the plan, we haven't done anything to verify that they've continued to be eligible. In fact, we haven't done a re-verification since 2013. So we are going to notify members of the plan during open enrollment that we're going to be doing that in November. We're going to require all dependents to re-verify and give them an amnesty period to take anybody off their plan that isn't eligible at this time. We also are going to continue to analyze the effectiveness of the Vera Clinic. Up until now, we've had to do that largely off of assumptions of how our plan has performed based on other plans in the Anchorage area. We don't have actual claims data for people who use the Vera Clinic, but we're working with them to be able to pass zero claims information through Aetna, which will allow us to compare the services that they receive at Vera to the cost that would be associated with that same service at another vendor in the community. So going forward, we'll have some kind of true apples to apples comparison numbers to be able to evaluate that kind of all important question, whether or not we're getting the value that we hope to get out of that Vera Clinic. We're also adding some additional disease management programs, trying to work on the long-term health and wellness of the employees in the plan so that they use less services. And we're engaging with the Pacific Health Coalition. If you're not familiar with the coalition, it's a group of about 45 plans through different organizations across the Pacific Northwest that have pooled together to try to get the best deal they can on different services related to health plans. And members of the coalition are able to choose those services a la carte. So our task force was very interested in joining the coalition to see if there are any low-cost options that we could add to our plan, things like Bridge Health. But also it would give us the opportunity to look at the existing elements of our plan to see if we could get some of them at a lower cost through the coalition itself. And then the last thing that we're doing to kind of maintain the long-term stability of the plan is we're going to put an RFP out next fall for our third-party administrator to make sure that we are getting the best value out of that provider. Next slide. The last thing I wanted to provide was just a page of resources that the board might be interested in. There's a link here to the benefits webpage. If you haven't visited that site in a while, it's a good to go and see the information that's available there. We have information on the monthly benefit rates if you're interested in seeing what those offerings are for the different plans for members on the health plan. We also have a history, a look back 2018 to 22 on the different renewal options that we've offered through the plan and what the contribution history has been. So if you want to kind of look at what changes we've made incrementally over the last couple of years, that information is available there. There's also two different analyses that have been done on the Vera Clinic. One that was done in 2019 by Alliant 2 years after we opened up the Vera Clinic, and one that was just received by the district a few months ago that was done by Milliman, that looks at the last 5 years since we opened up that clinic. And then there's also a link to comparison between the ASD health plan and the same plan offerings through the PEHT if you're interested in that comparison information. So spoke quickly because I knew we were short on time, but I think we got through it all. So Madam President, back to you.
Thank you. I see Member Higgins.
Yeah, and I know we don't have much time right now to go through it, but the maximum liability, most insurance plans have a stopgap group collectively. And if I owned a business right now, and if I knew that it was unlimited, you know, the height of it, without that stopgap type of liability, and knowing a 64 quake hits, knowing a worse pandemic than COVID hits, whatever happens, our liability is not protected. And if I own a private business, I say I'm going to lose the business, and we're going to lose, the liability is going to go through the ceiling. I haven't been any place, and I've been with some large corporations and business, so without that stopgap provision, collectively at least, out there. Now, we did individually, usually you do it too, and you do a careful analysis of where it's at, but there's a risk management component to this that seems to be missing from my comfort zone, that where that stopgap should be, that if worst case scenario, that's why you spread the risk throughout the country with other insurances and everything else. If you get hit in an abnormal way, right? The 64 quake hits and whatever goes on goes through the ceiling. I just don't see that protection with other, as I understand, the stopgap isn't there collectively. And so the liability for this many employees is huge, isn't it?
So we do have stop loss insurance that protects us against individual claims, right? So if a claim exceeds $500,000, then that additional insurance kicks in. But you're talking about the aggregate. On top of that would cap us out if we had 50 claims of $500,000.
Or 100, or 200, 500. I don't know, because if you got an earthquake, you don't know what's going to happen. Go ahead.
So we provided in Board Connect last week a summary of when that decision was made. We did carry that aggregate coverage through 2016. But in 2016, we had a really expensive plan year. It was the last time that we had to make a general fund contribution on behalf of the plan. And at that time, we looked at all of the services that were being provided and realized that we could save some fixed costs by removing that aggregate cap. And in partnership with Alliant, they did the analysis. And at the time, the decision was made that we would assume that risk. And each year since then, we have worked with Alliant to kind of reevaluate whether or not that proposition still holds. And to date, they have continued to advise us that we're still well positioned. But you're correct that if we have a major catastrophe, something that would produce lots of very, very expensive claims, we would have to cover that because we don't have that aggregate cap.
It just seems like we're going from one extreme. I joined the board in 2008, and I was upset that there was no self-insurance component to it. And companies with 40 people were doing it then because there were savings. But nobody out there, to my standpoint, from a business standpoint, says we won't have any aggregate limited liability unless they're Exxon and they own the insurance company or something like that, short of that. And so I think that's a serious concern I hope gets looked into in regards to the potential risk to the operations and what is best practices. What are businesses doing out there? Because I think it's going to be a hard time finding businesses that don't have that.
We can certainly revisit that issue.
Thank you, Member. Let's see. Did I see Member Jacobs? And then we'll go to Member Holloman.
Thank you, Madam President. So I think I understood that we're going to use an RFP process to open up to look for, to see if we have need to get a new administrator. are we taking the step and examining whether or not a self-funded plan is still the best value for us as a district and our employees as well? I'm asking the question because I'm thinking through, I think within the last 5 to 7 years, I believe the Alaska State Troopers moved away from having a self-funded plan and pooled with the State Employee Association. And it was determined that that was best for them in terms of benefits, in terms of cost. And so are we exploring that as well?
Yes. So to answer your question, Member Jacobs, that is something that the district does continue to look at, and whether the self-funded health plan is something that is still viable for the district with regards to costs. And so we will continue to revisit that to ensure that that is something that is not lost to us. Yes, we do want to make sure that our employees are getting the best benefit in addition to balancing the obligations that the district has. Okay.
So
Quick follow-up.
Yep, thank you. I guess if there's anything, and this can through a board connect or through a follow-up email, if any analysis that we've done historically on joining and pooling with like the State Employee Health Association or another entity like it, and what we found out would be beneficial, because if the troopers, if we're trusting our first responders are trusting their healthcare needs to a plan that isn't self-funded, it makes me wonder why our educators don't deserve that kind of option too. And so, or our paraprofessionals or other support staff. And so thinking through that. So any additional info would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to Member Holloman.
I wanted to ask if the costs for the Vera Clinic were included with the ASD plan. Is that considered part of the ASD plan, or is that broken out separately?
So the Vera Clinic cost is included as part of the overall fixed cost to run the health plan. And so that is accounted for.
Okay. Right. I see your mic on. Did you have a follow-up? Okay. All right. Well, you guys, this is the beginning of a conversation, but thank you for more information. And I'm hoping that, and thank you for the information that was in Board Connect. And welcome, Ty. Well, nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So with that, we do not have an executive session, so we will take a dinner break.
Move to adjourn our work session, Madam President.
Is there a second to adjourn?
Second.
Moved and second. Any opposition? Seeing none, we have 20 minutes. Thank you. Good, we got it.